kind of share just some details about kind of the logistics of how this event will go. So first, you kind of heard serverless. So there will be a motion that our debaters will debate. And we decided to go, it's somewhat a mouthful, but let me kind of read it out to you and then explain what this motion is about. So basically the motion is that 10 years from now, most newly created kind of billion-dollar companies, billion-dollar companies will be entirely serverless. And what do we mean by that? That basically, one, we want to kind of set a specific time. So the debaters will not kind of argue, oh yeah, it will happen eventually, but we're talking about a specific timeline 10 years from now. We're also not want to talk about like, two people startup, but really kind of, more, it doesn't have to be like a billion, but it's, companies of significant size. And basically, the reason why we also included the newly created, so we won't kind of spend time on debating, oh, IBM will never truly become, 100% serverless. That will just not be a very interesting debate, but more about like the new generation of companies. And when we mean entirely serverless, again, let's not nitpick about like, if they have like one container deployed, but primarily like the vast majority of their architecture is serverless, and we'll let the panel kind of to debate what is kind of serverless, and like I think kind of their definitions might vary. So the first team here, which is kind of on your left, I guess, will be arguing for the proposition, and the other team will be arguing against. And we'll make it kind of an Oxford-style debate, which means that first we'll start by asking you, how do you feel about the proposition before the debaters begin, and then eventually when they kind of finish their job, we'll ask you again, and the team that actually swung the most votes will be declared as the winner. So let me repeat the motion again, that 10 years from now, most newly created billion-dollar companies will be entirely serverless. So if you are for, meaning you believe that this is indeed true, please raise your hand and keep it up.
Ouch. You guys have a lot of work to do.
May the odds be in your favor.
Okay, and now if you believe this is not true, and any portion of it, please raise your hand, which is, let's see, just do a kind of quick, I think we're, again, it's fairly about, let's say, so, there roughly were 10 people that were kind of for, and about kind of half of the room was against. It's actually, the for team, it's kind of, you actually have more wonks.
We have a target-rich environment.
Yeah, you have definitely more votes to swing. The team that's going against, like you have to convince the new people. And obviously, like about half the room abstained. This is also the votes that you can impact. So the way we'll start, the first round will go that each presenter will start with a 3-minute, kind of arguing their position. So I think, George, you are going first, right? So your 3 minutes are.
All right.
Oh.
Thanks, Vitaly. Hi, everyone. Good evening. I realize I'm standing here between you and happy hour, so I'll make this brief. But imagine this is 10 years from now, and instead of me blocking your access to the pub, it's a server that you've just realized needs a software patch, right? A security patch. And when I say a server, I mean 1,000 servers spread across, I don't know, 5 cloud vendors, right? Do you really care about patching your servers? You probably do right now because it's part of your security posture, but do you want to care, right? Wouldn't you rather have that drink? Wouldn't you rather write some sweet business logic, right? Wouldn't you rather be serverless? Now, when I say serverless, I urge you to not constrain yourself to things like AWS Lambda functions as a service, which is one of our first forays into that space, but also broaden your horizons. Think about virtual kubelet, Fargate, serverless Kubernetes, and other future execution models that don't require you to manage and update servers. So now you're probably thinking about all the problems with serverless. It's hard to debug. It's expensive. There's cloud lock-in. There are questions about data storage and state. There's performance issues, right? But my partners here, Rose and Steve, are going to walk you through why these are not going to be a concern 10 years from now, and why if you're a savvy businessman starting a business 10 years from now, your best bet is to go serverless. With that, I'll hand it over.
Okay, so thank you, George. And now arguing against the motion, I believe it's James, right?
We're going to all do it.
Sorry?
1 minute each.
We're gonna one by one.
Oh, we're doing one by one.
Yes.
That's how we're doing it.
Yeah.
Okay, then Jess is going to go first.
So
Okay, nice. So yeah, it kind of seems like everyone's pretty realistic in this room because we all were saying against. The first thing that I want to point out is like, we're talking about in 10 years, like a multi-billion-dollar company is going to be entirely service. Like, can you name a multi-billion-dollar company today that does not run entirely in the cloud? Like, all of them are still running on premises. And if you think about like financial firms where like they're running on premises for good reasons because of security, because of latency, and then also like for high frequency trading, you're running custom compilers on your FPGA. Like, you want to be as close to the metal as possible. So like, I don't see a world where serverless is like going to work for that. Not to mention, like you mentioned Kubernetes and virtual kubelet, all things that I've worked on. But the second that you need to manage state in any of those, you're completely fucked. Like, there's absolutely no way to do it. So like, if you're doing that on premises, then you're even more fucked than in the cloud because the cloud's not handling storage for you. Like, what are you gonna do? Like, run fucking Ceph at scale? Like, that's just not gonna work. Like, none of this is going to work. And yeah, like at the end of the day, like someone is hosting your fucking servers, and if you're a multi-billion-dollar company, the unit economics are you're owning those fucking servers yourself.
okay, well, thank you, Jess, for the very lively argument. Who's next for the 4 team?
That would be me. So that was fun, but I can't agree. You know, this is about new businesses 10 years from now. And 10 years from now, for serverless, we're going to be about where we are in the cloud today in terms of the timeline. And if you look at the large businesses that have grown up recently, Uber and Lyft and Snapchat and, you know, the children of the modern era, they are not building their own data centers. And this is just part of a larger trend that we've been seeing playing out for a couple of decades now. You know, serverless is just the next step in a long chain. You know, once upon a time, any business that wanted servers would have to have their own data center. Pretty quickly, we went data centerless. You could just rent a cage in someone else's data center. Then we went rackless. You still had physical servers, but you weren't touching them. It was a remote hands thing, and they were just in the data center. You didn't need a cage. Then we went to VMs. So, you know, that was kind of the literal serverless. Then we went to containers. You were no longer managing your own VMs. And then we went to orchestration, and now we're starting to move to functions as a service and everything as, you know, queues as a service, storage as a service, all the cloud services and all the SaaS offerings that are out there. Every one of those transitions inserted a middleman who took a profit margin and added overhead and locked down and restricted what you were able to do and took away visibility and control. And every one of those transitions was initially resisted. It was bleeding edge. Not many people would adopt it for those reasons. But in the end, these transitions win out, especially for the newer businesses that grow up with the new tools. You know, how many new enterprises starting today you know, are building out their own racks, building their own worldwide CDNs, implementing their own container scheduling. And, you know, why do we keep moving up the stack? Because, well, one reason is flexibility. You know, you get more options, you can scale up and down, sort of the classic arguments for the cloud. You can run in more locations, more configurations. Eventually, competition drives down prices, and economies of scale kick in, and that cost penalty for the higher level service erodes. It might even reverse. Every new level of abstraction adds room for value-added features. Like now there's Cloudflare workers. You can run your functions at the edge. That'd be something hard to do without functions as a service. But most importantly, the abstractions win because these lower levels of dealing with the servers and the VMs is not any business's competitive differentiation. And as each offering matures, everyone chooses to hand over
Thank you, Stephen, for your wonderful
to the professional
motion.
team.
Okay, James, let's see how many F-bombs you can drop.
Okay. So I have a confession. 10 years ago, Alexi and I were writing Flash apps together. 10 years ago, Flash, it's dead. 10 years from now, there's going to be something else out there that we haven't even imagined yet. It's going to change the landscape of how we do things. It could be quantum computing. It could be some breakthrough in AI. But there's going to be something that doesn't fit the mold of serverless. There's going to be some new thing that serverless hasn't caught up to yet. Because we see these ebbs and flows of like, oh, let's simplify things and create abstractions. And then, oh no, that abstraction doesn't work for this new thing. And so 10 years from now, the world is going to be very different. Our needs are going to be very different. Our technology that we have available to us, the problems we're trying to solve, it's all going to be very different. And serverless is going to not be able to fit all the workloads and all the needs that we have. It's just not possible. I mean, even today, serverless can't even host serverless. You can't build serverless. You need servers and state and things that stay around to build serverless. So it's just not possible to run all our workloads, all types, and all the different technologies that are always changing under a very constrained abstraction. I rest my case.
Okay. Thank you, James. And now for, the final speaker for the argument is Rose.
Testing. All right. Hi. First off, I'm pretty sure Flash was moribund even in 2008. So, gosh. All right. So I keep seeing, Einstein around here. So many references to Einstein. And, there's a famous quote about you can't solve a problem with the mindset that created the problem. And I think that your point is correct, that in 10 years, we're probably not going to recognize some of the eventual forms that serverless will come to take. That when you look at serverless today, it is very limited in a number of ways. There are so many limitations. But at the same time, AWS is only 12 years old. Lambda is only 4 years old, and already it's one of the most popular services. Who can say what it's going to look like 10 years from now? You've got to consider that I think the reason why this is going to continue is because being able to write stateless function and compose them is so attractive, and being able to orchestrate your workflows in a serverless manner instead of writing yet another freaking data pipeline to the working one is so attractive. When you start talking about infrastructure as code, you've really kind of eaten the worst part of the system administrator's job and taken it as your own job. Isn't that awesome? YAML files. Yay. So really making that serverless and not having to worry about every small detail, maybe serverless on containers on Kubernetes is the way things are going to go forward, So being able to leverage the security and scale of cloud providers will be huge. And on top of that, there will be an ecosystem built on top of cloud providers. You're already seeing this with things like Databricks, Snowflake. Essentially, they're leveraging the commodity offerings of cloud providers, but offering their own value, their own kind of development. And you might say, oh, they're just duplicating the offerings, but in fact, they're offering significant value. There's an ecosystem developing already. If you're in VC, you see a lot of it. So I can't believe that this is just going to wither and go away. Tools are developing all the time. Even You know, you say there's nowhere to store state, but everyone is putting state everywhere, even in SQS, as terrible an idea as that sounds. In DynamoDB, in S3, state is being pickled and serialized and stuffed everywhere you can possibly imagine.
And thank you, Rose, for your passionate argument. So, and now on for our final speaker, Jana, arguing against the motion.
I'm actually, happy that you're trying, but let's talk about some of the, limitations. Stateless is completely fine on, more serverless and execution environments, but most of the actual workloads we see today is like, people just trying to run someone else's code. Think about like all, databases, the message queues and so on. Like, who's actually going to, provide an execution environment? And the notion says people will be completely on serverless entirely. So we can say that like a big majority of the, the software is still going to be running on non-serverless environments. And serverless is great if things are short-lived. If you have maybe an HTTP server or like an RPC server or whatever, but they can't really handle like long-lived stuff because of the, the trade-offs, and like they've been primarily have been designed to just serve this type of systems. And I'm not seeing like, cloud providers, providing more flexibility. We can also think about replication, how they auto-scale. It's very opinionated. It's just like they're just like, starting, forking new instances of the same thing. But lots of customers have like more, very sophisticated schedule and requirements. They need like, affinity. They want to be closer to the data sometimes and so on. Talking about limitations again, like specialized hardware is a really big topic. I am working on a, product that people are coming and asking us like all these like microsecond optimizations sometimes. So this is an actual need. I'm not saying that like serverless cannot be a solution for some problems, but I think it's a niche thing. So, it's hard to say that like everybody will be entirely on serverless just in 10 years or ever.
Okay, and thank you, Jana. And this kind of concludes the first round of our debate. And the second round will be questions that asked by me and you, the audience. So, kind of please, I'll ask the first question to kind of get, the mic enough time to travel to you, so please raise your hand. And so I want to have a question that kind of arguing against, to the team arguing against. So your kind of opponents propose that there are a lot of things, and even you said, that kind of disappear, but also the need for them disappear, whether it's, owning your own data center and, or kind of even being in a colo. And so why do you think that really servers are the things that has to stay forever when so many things that we actually needed kind of disappeared?
They aren't actually disappearing. Like, to your point, parts of Uber are actually moving on premises from the cloud, and there's a lot of other people doing that too, because if you look at all the S1s coming out of these like mega SaaS companies that will be the future multi-billion-dollar companies, thank you very much, they are actually going to move back on-prem because of the economics. None of them have cared about margins so far, and the second that they give a shit about their margins, they're gonna be like, oh fuck, we need to get off the cloud.
Do you guys want to respond?
Yeah, I agree. On-prem, cheaper, right? The thing that a lot of large customers are doing right now is doing multi-cloud, going across multiple clouds so they can use that leverage to negotiate better rates, right? And as much as there are many parts of capitalism that are not great, but capitalism means that you get lower prices over time. Competition. There are a bunch of big providers, cloud providers, competing for your workloads, right? Prices have been going down, and they will continue to go down. And at some point, competition and your negotiating power with a multi-cloud presence will make it such that the marginal cost of running on cloud doesn't make it worth it for you to run your own data centers, right? That's it.
Yeah, and I would just add, there are always local counterexamples to anything, but if you look at the trend, what percentage of the internet was on the cloud 10 years ago, 5 years ago, today? Do we really think that the tide is actually swinging in the other direction, and in 10 years from now, everyone's going to be running in their own data centers again?
I don't think it's swinging in the other direction. I think that like the people who are like very adamant about the cloud just don't see the rest of the world. There still is a bunch of people running on-prem. Like actually like a large percentage of IT spend is on-prem. It's actually way bigger than cloud. I think that like the VC market like that you were talking to, like it's different than the actual market. That's why you see company zero. It's not actually like reality.
Yeah, like 5 years ago, they were saying that like cloud is going to be an XXX billion, industry. We're still kind of like not there. We're still like, trying hard to migrate people from on-prem to virtual machines on cloud.
So I think we should constrain ourselves to new companies, right? Yes, migrate people, absolutely. They have workloads that don't lend themselves to easy migration. But we're thinking about the company that you start, not even today, not with the constraints of serverless today, with the constraints of state. I've managed state on Kubernetes. Yes, it's hard, but my argument is it's getting better, right? It will get better. And 10 years from now, what does it look like, right? And you're starting a company 10 years from now.
So let's let the audience to ask. Anyone has a question? The gentleman right there or here, yes.
Hi, all right. I think, hi everyone, I'm over here. My question, I feel like the panel is talking past each other because I don't think everyone agrees what the definition of serverless is.
We knew we were going to get to the definition part at some point.
What's that? Yeah, like for example, I was a Facebook engineer for 8 years, and I considered myself using an internal serverless platform that happened to be running on-prem. Just as an example of how I define a term. But I'm curious, maybe Jessie and George, I know both of you, so maybe just throw out a definition of serverless, because I think that would actually be interesting to hear both sides say what their definition is.
I feel like I'm the worst person to define serverless, so I'm gonna let someone else do it.
I'll say my definition is that when you match the demand for a application, some kind of function, whatever, with the supply, that is essentially the core of serverless, as that being able to match those. It's a different definition than most people give, and the reason why I give a different definition is because I could claim that Heroku is serverless. You pay for an instance, you pay $7 a month, and you can run a whole ton of stuff on that one instance. But it technically doesn't follow what most people call serverless because there is excess capacity that you have provisioned on that instance on Heroku. And so most people wouldn't call Heroku, even though you don't have to manage it, you don't have to deal with dependencies and security updates, most people wouldn't call Heroku serverless.
George?
To the most part, I agree, although I think the auto-scaling stuff is a secondary point. The primary point for me is just not managing OS updates. Like if you think about it that way, not managing the server, not caring about the health of a particular server.
We've had that with platform as a service though for a long time, and it wasn't called serverless. And so what's unique about serverless versus platform as a service?
Yeah, I think no, that's a fair point. I think scale is one of them, but serverless in this case allows just more execution models in my mind than just the constrained platform as a service offerings. Right?
Okay, let's try another question here.
Hey, right over here. Can you guys hear me? Hi. So I feel like one of the constraints to this problem right now that I'm interested in the against side is right now we're saying 100% of all of the development activity of all the servers are going to be running serverless. What if we lift that constraint and say just a meaningful amount of jobs from new large companies are going to be serverless?
I think it's fair to say that like things will run serverless. Like I myself have this like serverless thing that connects to Alexa, which like I don't even use my Alexa anymore and it's still running. But like I think that like there is a use for it as like a dumb pipe from one thing to another. At least that's how I think of serverless, as like more like Lambda. But in that sense, like you just don't have a shit ton of dumb pipes everywhere. Like you actually have like logic at the end of the day. So I would say like it's not going to be a majority, but it will be like, just here and there.
And you can certainly do serverless on-prem. So you can use things like Knative on Kubernetes to do serverless on-prem, and that works fine. But the question, back to my definition of serverless, is like what happens to that excess capacity? You've already bought the servers when you're on-prem, so what do you do with that? Netflix puts those resources back into what they call the trough so that they can be reused for other uses. Machine learning training, things that are not time dependent. So definitely agree. If we reduce it from 100% to some lower number, then yes, there will be some things that are built serverless so that they can return their resources back to a pool, or in the case of a cloud provider, the cloud provider gets those resources back into a pool so they can use them for other things.
I think the key point is if we define serverless as kind of fine-grained auto-scaling where you're matching the resources to the load and abstracting away the server, the operating system, and kind of those level of details, the question becomes, when are you adding value by controlling those things directly? Which are the applications where you want to manage the operating system, or you want to manage the creation and deletion of instances? Today that would mostly be because you need that level of control. The serverless offerings aren't giving you that level of control. And then the question becomes, how does that play out over time? On the cloud level, we've seen, an explosion in, containers as a service. There's been an explosion of different instance types. You can get GPUs, you can get FPGAs, you can get all kinds of crazy things in a container that in the first incarnation of infrastructure as a service wasn't there. So it's going to be a question of how quickly the serverless offerings start to offer that flexibility and take away some of the use cases where you need the control.
Okay, and let's have final question from the gentleman on the other side of the room.
Thank you very much. So, you've talked about you can put state. This is for the 4 team. You can put state in various persistent storage options. But what about things that are volatile? Now, of course, there is Redis, but I'm talking about things that have certain memory guarantees like console or zookeeper, or the plethora of applications that depend on those types of memory, those memory guarantees. Do you expect the applications that depend on those other applications, which require long-running or like leader election style algorithms, do you expect those to go away, or do you expect cloud services to have all of those APIs, or what?
Well, we're definitely seeing, there's such an explosion of cloud services from the first line cloud providers and from the companies building on top of them. So yes, I would expect to see in 10 years from now an incredible array, probably literally thousands, of these offerings covering covering the zookeeper and console, covering the big data, the small data, the latency sensitive, the latency, and all shapes and sizes.
I've been hoping for serverless zookeeper forever.
Yeah.
Even zookeeperless would be awesome.
Right.
Just get rid of it entirely.
Coming from the big data side, I'd say that I would fully expect that over time there will be great developments in, right now our schedulers are very primitive in terms of their ability to control resources in a serverless environment. Even just downsizing just doesn't work. Controlling shuffle as an external service just doesn't really work in a serverless environment right now. So this is an area where I'm fully expecting there to be kind of Kubernetes operators or pluggable cloud provider implementations that will essentially take away a lot of the current complexity.
So one more thing I'll say to that, specifically to your point about running things like Paxos or Raft or consensus algorithms on top of the serverless space, right? What they need is some local storage that's guaranteed to not disappear on them on a whim, right? And these abstractions do exist right now in the form of Kubernetes stateful sets. They're not perfect. They're not you're going to be in a world of hurt managing a set of Paxos servers on top of stateful sets, right? But they're the path. They're on a trajectory. They're on the right trajectory, right?
If you have a volume in a stateful set and it fails, you have to delete the volume, which defeats the entire purpose of the stateful set.
But
so I agree. That's true right now.
That's true right now. It's like they can't fix it.
The abstraction is being built to get there, to get to where you want it to be.
Good
right?
news, you don't have to. Google Cloud Dataproc uses distributed NFS. It's pretty awesome. That's where they shuffle. Why should you shuffle somewhere else?
Yeah. I think the key point, 10 years is a long time.
And how do we do leader election when the nodes aren't running to be elected?
Well, there's going to be a lot of...
How is this not a problem on clusters now?
But you probably won't be doing your own leader election like that. Console as a service, Zookeeper as a service.
So we make state someone else's problem. I'd love that. I love making state someone else's problem.
I mean, not always. The leader election, the Paxos cluster has to always be running, right?
So
but serverless doesn't mean those things disappear when you don't, when they feel like it. Some serverless workloads stick around. Some disappear when there's no load, right?
But if state is someone else's problem, then that doesn't solve the problem for like security, very like highly confidential jobs. For banks and stuff like that.
Poor operational security exists outside of the cloud as well. Security is not a cloud-based problem. It's an everywhere problem. So and in fact, some of these people exercising poor security would in fact be way better served by using cloud services that are actually well audited. It takes out an entire class of security problems. People who don't know how to encrypt data at rest and would probably have the key on their desktop in plain text if they did, can use services like Snowflake, which will take care of all of this for them that are already HIPAA compliant. So
Capital One.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, so with that, let's...
Just raise your hand if you think your security team is better than Google's, Amazon's, or Microsoft's. All right.
Okay, and with that, we're gonna move to our third and final round, which each member, again, will get 2 minutes to try to convince you to vote for their proposition. Let's start with the against team now. Who wants to go first?
Okay, I'll go. So I feel like we made a pretty compelling case, so hopefully none of you got swayed to the other side. If you did, though, with like the smooth talk of Kubernetes and all that, I will say that a lot of that is like just like icing on a cake that has not actually been built yet. And in 10 years, like sure, like it might actually be there, but also like look at where fucking OpenStack is today. Like no one really uses it. The people who use it are still in fucking pain. Like ask any OpenStack user if they're happy, and it's been years and they still aren't. So like, has there been any software, like look at Zookeeper. Zookeeper's also old, and it's like, are you still in pain using Zookeeper? Yeah, like you still fucking are. Like things don't get better. Bugs are still there, okay? That's all.
So I'm an optimist, perennial optimist. Things do get better over time. I think history tells us so, right? Yes, Zookeeper still sucks. You shouldn't use it. Use something else, or use a consensus as a service if it exists out there. But a lot of the arguments I hear are grounded on the reality as it is today, right? And I admit, like if I was starting a company today, it wouldn't be all serverless. Some of it would be, not all of it. But I want you guys to refocus on think about what the world was like 10 years ago and what it will like 10 years from now, what it will look like, right? Where there is demand, and there is demand because nobody cares about managing service. That's not like Steve was saying, that's not anyone's core competency. That's not going to make bank A better, well, bank is a bad example, but company A better than company B. But, and because of that, there is demand. And where there is demand, there is supply, because we're in a capitalistic society, right? And where there is supply, there will be competition, and prices will go down. And yeah, I rest my case.
James.
Remember what the premise was, is that 100%, all workloads could be serverless in these future billion-dollar companies. It's just not possible. Serverless can't even run serverless. You can't take serverless and run it serverless. It's not possible. So there's no way that all workloads are going to fit within the constraints of serverless and be able to be scaled to nothing and be able to fit that model. There's going to be something that comes out, whether it's quantum computing or something that changes the game in such a way that the abstraction breaks down, and we have to go back to more primitive servers.
Go ahead. Well, first of all, I sincerely doubt that multi-billion-dollar companies are going to be running serverless as a core business concern. But if you look at what people are using serverless for today, they're using serverless to launch all kinds of things, sometimes agnostic of whether it's a stateless function or a container or God only knows what, you know? It's being used for a variety of things maybe no one ever really considered when they came up with the case. And if you look at the penetration of serverless into our daily lives now, all the things that you don't really think of as being serverless, but in a broad way are serverless on premises, serverless as when you delegate cluster management, serverless is all over your daily life right now. So what do you think it's going to look like 10 years from now? And I'm going to focus on, you're going to get to use serverless whether you want to or not, because try to hire system administrators with bare metal experience now, because I worked at an exchange. At one of those places, if you want to talk HFT, all right, I worked there. And it is hard to find people who have that experience now. How hard do you think it's going to be to find those people 10 years from now? You'll use serverless, not necessarily because you want to, but just because, like Python, is second best at everything. You'll use serverless because you don't really have much of a choice to do otherwise. Enjoy. Victory is sweet.
Awesome. Yana.
So I think like this, conversation got out of control. Like, what is serverless? We don't have a, definite answer. It means like every time somebody is asking about the limitation, you're taking the abstraction level one, level above or whatever. But what if? Like, I think it's just purely speculation at this point. I feel like as a cloud provider, what we do is this: we give people some black boxes. We add some value by just being a little bit opinionated, by adding like additional values. Serverless functions is one of them. But we also provide some flexibility, right? Like if you go with the virtual VMs, you have more flexibility than serverless functions, for example. And all of this stuff has like different pricing models. So I think, this is the reality of it. Everybody needs a different option, and that's why like I do not believe that there will be anyone entirely on serverless, because that's not how the economy of this thing works at all. People are looking for velocity, reliability, extendability, security, and all of these boxes are provided by a different product. So you can take serverless to anywhere by just like extending the abstractions, or like just claiming that anything in the future, like any Kubernetes is like serverless or whatever. But like the reality is we need all these differentiators, because the pricing is different and there's like additional differences in terms of value and so on.
And to close those things off, Stephen.
So, there are always different trade-offs at different levels of the stack. But those trade-offs tend to shift over time as the higher levels of the stack improve and mature, and as competition kicks in. So, when you look at talk about like, kind of new forms of hardware, or, kind of new radical developments, and then you need your own control. So we've seen the emergence of, chips specialized for neural networks. We've seen all kinds of new neural network, algorithms and services coming out. For the most part, even today, forget 10 years from now, today, if you're not one of the giants, if you're not one of the cloud providers, you're not building your own neural net chips. You're probably not deploying your own neural net chips. You're flocking to Google Cloud or one of the other cloud providers that will give that to you. Even if you're a multi-billion-dollar company, there's a good chance you're not even running your own software directly on those chips. You're taking advantage of one of the AI services that the cloud providers are offering. There are always going to be things you can't do at the highest level of abstraction. You can't build serverless on serverless. Actually, you could. I mean, you could write a function that runs someone else's function. I don't know why you would, but you could. But the point is you wouldn't want to. The whole point is you're not in the business of providing serverless. You're in the business of whatever your business is. And the things that you can't do at the high levels of the stack are the things that you don't want to do unless you are in the business of the lower level of the stack. And I think that's the common thread through everything from the cloud and virtual machines on up.
Awesome. So let's give a huge round of applause for valiant debaters. And thank you. You did a great job. And now, before anyone leaves, let's see the results. So, who now again for the motion that 10 years from now most kind of large companies will be, most newly created large companies will be entirely serverless. Who believes that this proposition is true? Please raise your hands. Oh wow, you guys did a good job. Like I think you're like double, triple the votes, let's say. Okay, and who actually does not believe that this proposition is true? Yeah, I think it's pretty clear to say that the team arguing against the motion won. Congratulations.